Comics?
Comics.
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 Boneless Comics Podcast.
Boneless Comics Podcast. Comics?
Because they have no bone.
All right, everybody, we're back for part 2 on She-Hulk, where we're going to be covering She-Hulk Time Trials, which collects She-Hulk issues 1 through 6, published by Marvel Comics in 2005, written by Dan Slott and penciled by Juan Babio. And if that sounds familiar, that's because they did the same thing in 2004. But if you haven't already, you should definitely go back and listen to part 1, where we talk about She-Hulk's origin and discuss both the writer and the penciler for the series. And since we've already done that, we're going to move right into the story synopsis and discussion section for this episode.
All right. So in the meantime, we also might talk about the new Disney Plus show that has not aired yet as far as we're concerned in this recording. So we're going to maybe make some predictions or thoughts, or I don't know, maybe just watch the trailer and let us know what you think.
The following is a paid advertisement by Goodman, Lieber, Kurtzberg, and Holloway.
We at the Superhuman Law Division at Goodman, Lieber, Kurtzberg, and Holloway will fight for your right to be treated equally in the eyes of the law. Here, we put the human in superhuman and the firm in law firm. And remember, I go green so you can get green. That means money. Call 1-877-SHE-HULK today.
All right, so we are back. So now this story, actually in the Marvel Comics continuity at the time, takes place after the House of M crossover event, in which the superhero Scarlet Witch suffered a mental breakdown and tried to alter the fabric of reality to recreate her lost children. Sound familiar, right? We also had Avengers Disassembled, which we actually covered way back in season 1. So if you haven't listened to that, you should. It's one of our most popular episodes. But basically what happens in there that's pertinent to today's story is that She-Hulk was under a spell and ended up ripping Vision apart because he was possessed by Ultron, and Hawkeye was killed, and actually I don't think had been seen since in comics.
No.
Like, he was actually like out of comics for a good, year or so?
Yeah, at least that long. So those are story points that are going to be addressed in this, because She-Hulk has been through some stuff. She also destroyed the town of Bone, Indiana, I believe, during this era as well, and there's going to be some fallout from that event. But as far as everybody knows, that was just caused by the Scarlet Witch, and that wasn't... Jennifer didn't naturally lose control of her powers.
Mm-hmm.
So to sort of set the stage for where we're going to be moving with this story, she is still working for Goodman, Lieber, Kurtzberg, and Holloway, GLK&H, a prestigious law firm that is well known for its superhuman law division. She returns to work after She-Hulk fought Titania, her arch nemesis, and her place of employment was destroyed during that battle. And then Jennifer finds that there have been some changes after everything was rebuilt. So the senior partner, Holden Holloway, who is the person that actually brought Jennifer on, has left without any contact and put a new guy in charge, Mr. Arthur Zix, who has decided that the law firm should not just be representing superheroes, but supervillains. So this is going to continue some of the themes that we talked about last time. We're emphasizing She-Hulk's normal human self as Jennifer Walters and her ability to practice law. And it takes the character in a new direction by kind of using that tension between her job as an attorney and her life as a superhero to explore issues of identity, power, and gender in comics. So the beginning of this trade actually has a nice callback to the earlier story, where Jen is still listening to the same song on her iPod that she had in like the first issue of their first run, which is the "I get knocked down and I get up again." And she goes, "Wait, that's still on my playlist?" So I thought that was kind of like, is that symbolic of like, oh, her character has moved on, she doesn't want to listen to the same music even now? But just a nice
But she
callback.
still is.
Yeah.
It's funny because that's actually a callback, but from my perspective, since I goofed and I read the 2005 run first before reading the 2004, I actually went back and I was like, oh, she listened to that song earlier as well. So like I got the same reference experience, but in reverse, because I was like, oh, she's listening to that later. So I guess this is where that originated. So it's just kind of funny.
That's funny.
But her first day back to work after all of these events, she and her partner Pug, that we mentioned before, Augustus Pugliese, they have a client named Charles Charkowski who is charged with murder because he shot an unarmed man in the back, but he's claiming self-defense because of time travel. So not only do we have the elements of superheroes, supervillains, superpowered people in a court of law, but now we're also introducing time travel. So it gets really complicated here. But it's interesting because we get to see the TVA, or the Time Variance Authority. And I've actually not really had any experience with them in comics, but I've seen them in the Loki TV series on Disney Plus, which
Mhm.
was kind of interesting. So, but basically, if you're not familiar with either the comics or the Disney Plus version, the Time Variance Authority is an organization that watches over the countless different realities of the multiverse, occasionally intervening when something important is disrupted or when time travel causes existential danger. So it's pretty well like that basic premise is the same in the comics and in the show, but there are definitely a lot of differences between them as well, which I mean, that's just kind of, the nature of the beast, comics and movies being a little bit different. But the version in the comics was established actually back in 1986 as more of like a spoof organization than a true player in universal events, meant to parody real world bureaucracies with a touch of Marvel meta humor. So it's definitely a different
Mhm.
focus. I was going to say AIM, but that's another organization. It's
It
definitely a different
is.
focus than
Yeah, MODOK was in the first volume now. Come on. We're talking
okay.
about the second volume.
Get this
All
straight now.
right.
So many
Or the
organizations.
third actually. Zarkowski or Sarkowski or however you say his name. He looks exactly like Colonel Sanders to me in the
Hmm.
way that they draw him. And for some reason I just couldn't get over that. I was like, so the KFC guy shot somebody in the back and is claiming self-defense because of time travel. And I don't know.
Maybe that's how he got the
Basically
recipe for his chicken. Is he time travel and he took it back
I
in
don't know.
time and he
I
had to
mean,
shoot somebody.
he's got a white bushy mustache. He's wearing like a white suit, and he's got the little collar thing. And I was just like, it's Colonel Sanders. So that was very funny to me. And the TVA that you mentioned beforehand, I don't think they're played completely seriously either.
Yeah.
They have these ridiculously overblown suits of armor that they wear that almost looks like something out of like Judge Dredd
Mm,
comics or something like that. The whole I am the law, and but it's obviously kind of poking fun at that extreme, ultra violent comic book stuff. So that's what the TVA officers look like. And there was also another really cool moment at the beginning, just another one of those kind of fourth wall breaking things where they're like, well, when the building got destroyed, we lost all the comic books in the basement.
mm.
So we're having to replace them with trade paperbacks instead because the new proprietor says that they're cheaper, but now we have to wait for them. And so we don't know how these stories are going to end. So how are we supposed to use them in court when we don't know, we don't have all the issues and stuff like that? And that was very much the age old sort of conflict between comic book fans about like, oh, do you wait for the trades or do you get the issues when they come out? And that's just, if
Yeah.
you're within the fandom, you kind of know what they're talking about there. So
Yeah, we get that sort of like, well, trades are destroying the comic book industry because,
right.
people are buying these collections from different sources rather than going to
Hmm.
their, actual comic book stores and getting issue by issue. And so it's harder to, for companies to get the money and see the ratings and, produce more content and that sort of thing. So it's
Right.
just funny to have that. It wasn't a major plot point, but it was just kind of funny
No.
to have that, like, what do you call that? Meta humor, I guess.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
fourth
I
wall.
mean, they're winking at the audience a little bit there.
Yeah. So we have a trial in this one for the time traveler. And so, due to the media coverage from the physical evidence, because basically there's a photograph that literally catches him in the act of shooting this guy in the back, all the jurors that they select have to be unbiased. And because there's so much media coverage, everybody's seen this and everybody has an opinion. Because, even in 2005, it was like when something big hits, it's all over and, most people are aware of it. So to
Yeah.
find jurors that could be impartial, the TVA helps to select jurors that died over a year ago, which would make them impartial and also not able to tell anyone else about the trial or time travel because they're going to get sent back to their realities and then they're going to get killed off. So there's no
Mhm.
consequences. But they make a huge mistake and I don't think we ever find out the reason why. And it seems like a huge oversight, but somehow they select Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye, as one of the jurors who he's not necessarily a hothead, but he definitely likes to do his own thing, and you don't tell him no, he'll find a way to do it anyway. And since he was killed a year ago in Avengers Disassembled, he he kind of like throws a monkey wrench into the mix because She-Hulk recognizes him right away and is like, "Oh my gosh, it's Hawkeye. Like if I could just sneak him a note to tell him that he's going to die when he comes back to his time period, then maybe I can prevent it and, he'll still be with us."
Hmm.
But unfortunately, she gets caught and she's sentenced to being erased from the timeline. Sounds a little severe, but that's kind of what they do, the TVA.
Well, I mean, and the understanding is that like these people that died, it's sort of like the idea of the fixed points in time that they have in Doctor Who. It's like this
Hmm.
has to happen. This is supposed to happen. Hawkeye is supposed to die. So you can't go messing with history. And they
Right.
all got a big speech before this time trial began about how we're not trying to mess with history here. Like that's not what we're all about. And then Jennifer at her first opportunity is like she's making like hand gestures and doing all this stuff to try and communicate to Hawkeye that like you're gonna
Well,
die
it's sign
and
language because
yeah,
he's
sign
hard of
language.
hearing.
And so which is very funny. He totally misses all of that. And in fact, he makes the timeline incursion worse because he actually sneaks out and fights crime in between court sessions. And so all these people see Hawkeye outside and they're like, "Wait, you're dead." And he's like, "Yeah, I've heard that before, buddy." And they have a lot of those jokes where it's like
Mhm.
like it sounds like to him it's a normal thing for a villain to say, but from our point of view, we know they're going like, "No, you're actually dead. Like, why
Yeah.
are you here?" So they did have a lot of fun throwing him out into the world for like a night where he kind of messes around and messes stuff up. But you do see Jennifer's impulsiveness come through here because she doesn't think it out. There's no like, oh, what are the ramifications of this going to be? She's just like, nope, if I can save Hawkeye, I'm going to. Here's a note that tells you how you're going to die. Your
Yeah.
arrows catch on fire and they explode. And again, if you guys don't remember that, go back to our first episode because we actually covered that story in great detail. So,
Yeah, so there's another reason too why this is not good, and Pug tries to say, we need to get that juror dismissed because he's going to be biased because he's an Avenger and you're an Avenger, and
mhm,
conflict of interest and all of this stuff. But obviously Jen wants to keep that quiet because she wants to try to save Hawkeye. But, like I said, she gets caught, and so now she's on trial, and the TVA has this like computer model projection or something of the time stream where they show important events where She-Hulk came and saved the day, and then they show that somebody else with super strength always shows up in her place. So She-Hulk is not unique, and it's okay that we erase her from the timeline because somebody else will step in and take over where, She-Hulk was there. So we're not going to change any events, we're not going to change any outcomes, and that's like a really devastating blow for any character, especially when, she's trying to reconcile Jen Walters and She-Hulk and find each of their
mhm.
places in the world. And she's trying to find her own uniqueness basically in those ways. And now these people are telling her that, no, you're not unique. We can replace you with, anybody, and they could do just as
Right.
good a job, if not better. So everything in the time stream that's happened up to this point will happen as it did. It'll just be somebody else instead of you. Like, ouch. That was
Yeah, it's pretty harsh. And I think she actually starts with arguing like, "Wait, but I'm an Avenger. Avengers are important." And they're like, "Oh, the Avengers are the worst time offenders of all time."
of
And they
course.
go back and they sort of reference a bunch of Marvel events and they're like, "No, you're way worse than like King the Conqueror or any of these time villains that we faced." So it was funny, but yeah, it's a big blow to her ego when they're basically like, "You're not important enough to time to exist, so we can just erase you and it's fine."
Yeah. And then they take it a step further and they show She-Hulk this dismal future, which she would
Mhm.
have caused by her actions. Like if she would have been able to go through with it, then, everything would have turned to ruin, unless, of course, we erase her from history, because then that dismal future will never happen. So it's all, very logical. And they have these like computer models or whatever to be able to show all of this stuff. And in the end, She-Hulk actually agrees, is like, well, I can't really argue with this evidence. Like, if you're saying that, this dismal future is caused by my existence and, I've really done this heinous crime, then I need to submit to sentencing, which again is being erased from history. So
Right.
there's a breakout sort of in between the first story and this story, and there's a supervillain known as Clockwise who ends up being sort of able to hitch a ride when they start grabbing the jurors and they grab She-Hulk and they start grabbing
Mhm.
people that can testify to She-Hulk's character because they try to make an appeal to the court. So this supervillain actually infiltrates the TVA and dresses up as the executioner. So when it comes time for She-Hulk to be executed, this guy actually tries to steal the instrument of execution, which is called the retcan, because it can retcon you out of existence. So it's called the retcan, which is
Yes, it
pretty
can.
clever. Yes, it can. But instead of executing her, he tries to steal it. And a fight breaks out, and She-Hulk is able to save the day because she basically again uses her arguing skills to say, well, if you erase me, there would be no trial. And then you wouldn't have had the opportunity to steal the retcan. So if you think about it, erasing me would be a very bad idea. And it stuns him long enough that she's able to kick him in the face, during the confusion. But it's
Right.
cool because there's like a couple other fun moments where they have some superheroes that we've never heard of, and they throw them, sort of out there, and they end up getting erased using the retcan by Clockwise. And then they're like, well, what happened to, Dr. So-and-so? And they're like, who? And it's funny because we've never heard of these characters in Marvel continuity because they got erased from this event. So it was just kind of a neat little,
Exactly.
like,
Yeah,
I don't,
that was pretty clever writing. One thing I wanted to touch on a little bit that is interesting, something that is established a little bit more in the second trade that you missed out on was Jennifer needing the gamma charger to transform into She-Hulk. And so what
mhm,
essentially has happened is that she's been through a lot in the last year. Between the Avengers titles and her own title. She destroyed the town of Bone, Idaho. She killed Vision. Hawkeye died. Ant-Man died. And then Titania, her arch nemesis, destroyed Timely Plaza, which was her workplace.
mhm.
So she kind of has like a mental block that she's finding it harder and harder to change back into She-Hulk. So Doc Samson, who is sort of like psychiatrist to Bruce Banner and I guess Jennifer Walters as well, he develops the gamma charger, which allows her to change into She Hulk whenever this device is charged up. But she can't do it at will like she could in the first volume that we read. And this
Mhm.
is really still just part of her character trying to reconcile both parts of herself. Like now the pendulum's kind of swung the other way where she's like, well, I'm more comfortable as Jen because her life doesn't have all this crazy drama and trauma that She-Hulk's life does. And so now she's kind of more like, I don't know, and she's not able to switch at will. So later on in the run, we find out that there's actually more of a reason for that, and it had to do with the hex that Scarlet Witch put on her
Hmm.
to prevent people that wish Jennifer Walters harm from realizing she's She-Hulk. That actually interfered with her transformation ability. But there's also like a psychological block that she kind of has to break through. So that to me already kind of gets you more invested in her character where you're like, all right, well, she's got to figure out how to navigate this and again make both parts of herself whole. And the cool thing about using the trial is she gets to hear firsthand from people that she's impacted just like what she's meant to them basically. So that's cool. Like we have Captain America take the stand and several other people, Spider-Man and I think Silver Surfer even takes the stand at one point. And it's neat how they sort of celebrate all of her history in comics while explaining what's unique about her as well in order to justify her continued existence.
Yeah, I think this is a really good jumping on point, and that's kind of why, like,
Mhm.
when I was reading this, there were a lot of things that I picked up that I liked right away. which was, references to the TVA and how it was like there were goofy things happening, but they didn't feel like they detracted from the story that was going on. And then we actually see at the beginning when Jen is having trouble turning into She-Hulk to save a civilian, she actually uses martial arts in the form of pressure point attacks to stun the aggressors and get away. And I was like, oh my gosh, do we actually have a superpower character that actually knows how to fight for once? It's amazing. Like she
Yeah.
isn't able to transform, and you'd think that she would just like run and cower, but she's able to hold her own.
Hmm.
And so like I started getting into this and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Mike, this was a great choice that you
Yeah.
picked, for us to read. And I'm really like talking about this. And about halfway through, now I think I might have even been done pretty much reading and just putting my notes together, and you're like, oh, that's the wrong one. That's, we're supposed to be talking about 2004. So that was the reason for the 2 episodes, because I was like, I really like this story and I have all these notes, and I don't want to just send them to the recycle bin, but at the same
Yeah.
time, like we said, we're going to talk about single green female, so it worked out that we're able to talk about both. So
Yeah, well, I think something really cool is that now, having read the first volume, some of the things in the third volume resonate a little bit more too.
mhm.
Like the attorney that they bring on board to represent She-Hulk is Southpaw from 15 years in the future. And
Yeah.
so where we left off in the last story that we saw her, she was a supervillain. And she was just, she didn't really come to the side of good. She just defended her grandfather. But She-Hulk begins kind of a mentorship with her where she's kind of like her parole officer, but also teaching her, like, you can't just go out and, punch people in the face whenever you get angry at them. Like,
Oh.
as much as that sounds crazy coming from a Hulk, that's where Jennifer's going with that. So
Mhm.
so it's cool because in this story we see Southpaw, but she's in the future. She's actually an accomplished superhero, and she's the best attorney at GLK and H in the future, which is how she becomes She-Hulk's attorney in this case. So that's kind of a cool thing that brings it a little more full circle, is to have her come in and be like, well, no, Jennifer Walters, I'll represent you and I'll do all this for you. And she's just like, Southpaw? Like, what are you doing here?
So during the trial too, we don't have one judge, but we have 3 judges that all look
Hmm.
the same. And they say that it's Mobius, which, again, from the Loki Disney Plus show, we have a character named Mobius in that. But in the comics, his name is actually Mobius M. Mobius, and the M in his middle name stands for Mobius. So his name is Mobius, Mobius, Mobius. Um, but he is basically, he represents the bureaucratic leadership and middle management of the TVA, and they're made up of various versions of him throughout time. And so it's weird because you have this guy's face like everywhere, and it's the same guy throughout time in all these positions, but also his physical appearance is based on that of Mark Gruenwald, who's a Marvel writer and editor, best known for tidying up continuity and striving for internal consistency, who also conceived the idea of the official handbook of the Marvel universe. So it's kind
Hmm.
of funny that, like, we have this character based off of a real life person. Well, I guess his look is, that's how he's drawn.
Yeah.
But then his face is everywhere. Like, can you imagine like being a Marvel writer and you're in a comic, which is cool to see your face, but like anytime they show the office staff or they have these 3 judges up there, it's like people who have your face like everywhere in all these scenes. Like, oh my gosh, I get it. Like, it was just funny. But then there's actually a comment that I found, Fantastic Four Annual number 24. They actually acknowledge this resemblance by stating that the Time Variance Authority are sort of the Mark Gruenwalds of time continuity. So a little bit of fourth wall breaking in the Fantastic Four as well. So that was
Yeah,
just
well,
kind of fun.
I was gonna say that's actually a precedent that they set in FF pretty early,
Mhm.
because the whole scene of, like, from Rise of the Silver Surfer, of like Stanley and Jack Kirby trying to crash the Fantastic Four's wedding and then getting kicked out, that's in
Yeah.
the comics. That's something that he and Jack wrote into those old stories in the 60s. So Stanley has always had kind of a jokey, and sometimes they'll have writers or editors appear and make jabs at them in the books. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
very consistent with stuff that they've done in the past.
And the art in this one is a little bit different, kind of speaking along those
Hmm.
lines. Some of the, I don't know, I guess because we have some guest artists in this one, it's a little bit inconsistent, but the way that they drew Clint Barton looked to me like he came right off the cover of GQ magazine. I'm like, okay, I get that he's not necessarily like the ugliest guy in the world, but why does
Mhm.
he look like a, magazine cover model? It just struck me as like, does, are we like Hawkeye fans and so we want to prettyify him or something? It was just weird.
Well, it's funny because this came around a time where Hawkeye had not been seen as particularly cool in a
Mm,
while. And so this was about 5 years into, Marvel had been doing the Ultimates and they'd been doing other stuff where they're really trying to transform Hawkeye's image and make him a lot cooler. And so I think that his appearance here is probably just part of that, where they're trying to really like, hey, look at Hawkeye. He's super cool. He's a great looking guy and all of that. They had him do some really just truly insane and kind of gross stuff in the Ultimates to try and make him look cool. Like, he gets captured and pulls off his fingernails and like throws them into a guy's throat and stuff. I mean, it was really over the
oh,
top. But
wow.
this is way into that period of Marvel going like, we really need to sort of sexy up Hawkeye a little bit and
Mm,
make him a little bit cooler. So I that note probably came from editorial. I mean, maybe it was the penciler's choice as well. It could have just been their choice. But when I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, I remember this. This is when they were kind of trying to, make him a little more appealing to audiences.
mhm.
And I really don't think that he took off though until Matt Fraction got a hold of him and did that run. And I think that was really the run where people were like, oh wow, Hawkeye's awesome. You know.
Yeah.
So
Well, and ditched the purple costume too, because it was really
right.
like over the top. Like I guess a lot of superhero costumes, especially in the, older eras, were very over the top. But that one just always struck me as like, especially when you are a character that your accuracy is what's important. And so you need your vision, and
Hmm.
not because you're a sentient robot named Vision, but because you need to be able to kind of see in all directions and make these trick shots. But when you wear a mask or you wear a giant, face mask with this thing on your head and it's like just all everywhere, how can you see to make these, you know, shots and that sort of thing? That's something
Yeah.
that kind of bugged me with costumes like that, is like, yeah, it looks over the top, but when it's actually messing with the functionality of what it is you're supposed to be doing, kind of like Jen Walters busting through all of her office clothing like every day, that she transforms into She-Hulk. It's things like that that I'm just like, just, it just little things like that that it's like, oh, come
Right.
on, just
Yeah.
take you out of it a little bit.
Yeah, this is definitely pre Matt Fraction and pre somebody
Mhm.
really finding a good niche for that character to
Yeah.
fit in. So,
I'm definitely glad that we didn't get any like weird She-Hulk outfits, but we kind of did during the little scene where Janet Van Dyne, aka the Wasp, is like trying to dress She-Hulk up in various outfits,
yeah.
just to kind of, do the same thing, I guess, that the writers did to Hawkeye, or the artist did to pretty him up a little bit. They were trying to do the same
Mhm.
thing to her. But there's a line that the Wasp says that where I'm going to change our little Gamma girl into a Glamma girl, and it's just like, oh my gosh, okay.
Well, Janet Van Dyne, of course, is the Wasp is a fashion designer. That's her
Mhm.
job in the comics. So there was some precedent for this, and she came up in the trial because she's like, well, I designed her costume, and that's how we originally met and all of that. So
Yeah.
I think honestly it was just an excuse to get another penciler in there to do another take. It was Amanda Connor, who mostly has worked for DC. I was very surprised to see her doing pages in a Marvel book.
Hmm.
She's really well known for Harley Quinn, Power Girl, a lot of those type of books. So the stuff that tends to be a little bit jokey or a little bit lighter.
Okay.
But she drew those pages of She-Hulk. So it's notable that there were so many artists in this issue, because if you take all of She-Hulk's continuity as a whole, the third issue of this trade is actually She-Hulk's 100th total issue.
Mhm.
So they had a bunch of guest artists coming in to do various pages that
Okay.
had maybe worked on the character before, or that were like, hey, I want to crack at that. And then each person that took the stand, they would change pencilers. But I definitely think it was distracting because
Yeah.
it took me out of the story, because there are a lot of drastically different art styles, especially Scott Collins, who gives her like ginormous hair and like she's just like ripped beyond all recognition, and that was very inconsistent with everybody
Yeah.
else's.
That
So
surprised me. Like I went from one page to the next and I was like, oh my gosh, like her hair was the first thing I noticed. And then like her definition, and there's this like side shot of her, and you just see like all these rippling muscles. And I'm just like, I went back to
Is
the
it the
previous page.
90s?
Yeah, right. I went back to the previous page because I was like, did I miss something? Did something happen? Like what in the world is going on? Did I click on the wrong thing? And I showed my wife, I was like, okay, look at her in this panel. Now on the next page, look at her here. And even my wife was like, whoa, okay, that's really different. Like, I mean, her hair is just
Yeah.
like huge. It's not a perm, but it's like
Mhm.
really long and full, and it's just like, everywhere. And I think her hairstyle actually stays that way for the rest of at least that issue, if not for a while.
The last couple issues were penciled by Scott Collins, I believe, or at
Okay.
least the one where she goes back to Bone, Idaho was.
Hmm.
So you do see more of that later on, which he's somebody that again has done more work for DC that I'm aware of. I believe he co-created the version of Blue Beetle that most people know now,
Hmm.
Jaime Reyes. And so he's done a lot of art for that and various other stuff. He actually we mentioned in our Red Lanterns episode that Larfleeze had a book. He penciled that too.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah.
Interesting. Another witness that we had during the trial by the name of Buford T. Hollis, aka Razorback,
Oh
who's
my gosh.
basically a trucker from outer space. So he is definitely, rough around the edges here when he first gets up, and they're like, "Well, let him talk, maybe he'll help as a character witness." And this is like one of those incidents that like maybe it's a little, over sexualized, but at the same time the reason that we're telling this story is very clearly for comedic value. Like we're
Mhm.
not poking fun at the character and saying that there's something wrong with her, but we're more just saying, you know what, there's been some controversial choices maybe made in the past. And so we're
Mhm.
kind of poke some fun at that. So we got, Buford coming up here, and he's like, well, there's this story about She-Hulk, and we were fighting in space. She got her suit and her clothes ripped to shreds by a missile. And when she was taking her final big breath of fresh air, the enemy got distracted by watching her chest expand and drove their ship right into an asteroid. And I was just like imagining this in my head, like it was hilarious. And they show the scenes of like, obviously they cover her up, but they show
Yeah.
her, and you see these like dinosaur creatures, and they're all just like freaking out, and then their ship explodes, and it's like, how comedic is that? That
I
like you
think the
defeated your
dinosaur
enemy
creatures are
from.
saying "Who mama" as well. That was that was the dialogue in that panel.
It was just so ridiculous that it was funny, and it
Oh
wasn't
yeah.
it wasn't supposed to be like a legit plot point that like, oh, we defeated the intergalactic, whatever because of her nakedness, but it was more just like
Right.
a funny situation. And so he's trying to say that like, well, She-Hulk is unique because, who else would have been able to, distract these guys and cause this incident, which really didn't help her case, but it was
It
hilarious.
was hilarious. Yeah, you see all the other superheroes in the stands just kind of like
It's
putting
like,
their heads in their
oh.
hands and before Jennifer was like, "Let him take the stand. What can it hurt?" And
Mhm.
then obviously that happens.
Yeah.
They do eventually have Bruce Banner up there as well, which
Mhm.
it's interesting that we haven't talked about the Hulk a whole lot in these two episodes. But I actually like that about She-Hulk because I don't feel like she is a female character that relies on her male counterpart to exist. She's not somebody that's really defined by the Hulk either. So they do have him take the stand and I you had written down that you weren't really a fan of this moment because he does say his kind of cliched Hulk line of
Yeah.
like, "You wouldn't like me when I'm angry, and it makes me angry to erase her from the timeline." There was something in there that I did like where he says that when he created She-Hulk, it was the one thing that he's done that he knows is good in his life. And so Bruce Banner is a lot more tortured character than Jennifer is. And so that was kind of a neat little character nugget there that I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense that he would be like, well, I need her to keep existing because that's the one good thing that's come out of like my gamma irradiation.
Hmm.
So I don't know.
Interesting. I guess I was kind of thinking like from the Disney Plus trailer that, like there was a lot of Hulk in it. And so just
Yeah.
seeing him, I'm just like, I don't want him to overshadow. And I definitely don't want to have the CW Supergirl problem where it's like all of her villains and issues are all Hulk things. Like if she struggles with
Yeah.
anger and she, has to basically is like a poor copy of the Hulk, that's no fun. Nobody wants to watch that. Like
Right.
we want to see her be her own character. So
Hmm.
maybe I don't think he would definitely have some kind of mentorship, but at some point he needs to go and take a back seat so that, She-Hulk can do her thing and get the spotlight. So,
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
all right. Well, let us take a quick recess and then we will be back with more She-Hulkness.
Deliberations will continue.
They shall.
Whether you like it or not, you're now a superhero.
Very good.
Just trying to show you
No,
how it's done.
I'm shown.
All right, we are back. My name is Buford Razorback. No, I'm just kidding. But that was fun.
Razorback.
Razorback. That's right. So moving on from Razorback, we have Spider-Man making another appearance. And basically his testimony is that She-Hulk is quippy. They quip together, and quip-wise, that makes him a better quipper. And that was the point where I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm a She-Hulk fan, and yeah, we need to continue her existence because Spider-Man
Right.
endorsed her, so it's all okay. But it was just kind of funny because like it makes him a better quipper, but also like the quips that she uses are different because they're not comedic to like throw your enemy off in like, well, I guess they do throw your enemy off in confusion, but it's not like a comedic like, banter where it just kind of continuous and pelts you. It's more of a like get you confused and thinking about something like, well, if you erase me, this would happen, or well, you got to think through this plan because if you do this, it's going to, cause this, and it makes the villain stop for a second and go, well, wait a minute, she actually has a point there, and then that's when she, you get a foot to the face or
Yeah.
or a punch to the face or that kind of thing. And
Pile drive to the face.
A nice pile drive to the face. Or a punch to the face.
It is great because I think that does shine a light on what makes her really unique in that, yes, she has the super strength. Yes, she can bust in heads, but she can also bust in minds with her arguing, and
Yeah.
she can use those skills that she uses in the courtroom to take down supervillains by bringing up things that most other superheroes wouldn't think of. And so when she gets them into these logic traps and they stop, it's like, well, that's your moment to shine.
Hmm.
They did have another character take the stand. Again, this was just a quick vignette, but the Silver Surfer appears and he's like, she introduced me to 80s power ballads. Very inspiring. And I was just like, that feels like it was in a James Gunn Guardians of the Galaxy movie right there. Like that felt like it was just ripped right out of one of those. And this is obviously way before those, came out, but that was cool to me because I was like, I could totally see this being in one of the Marvel movies or something like that.
Yeah.
So, did the stuff with Southpaw actually land with you, having not read the first trade, as far as her being? Because we do end up at the end of the trial where they're like, She-Hulk has to exist, and we've acknowledged how important she is, and then Jennifer comes to Southpaw and she's like, I'm so glad I inspired you to be a superhero. And she's like, well, that was this other hero you've never heard of. And she's like, oh, well, glad I inspired you to be an attorney. And she's like, no, that was my grandfather. And she's like, oh, well, fine. And she's like, but you inspired me to be a better person. And I thought that was
Aw.
kind of cool. You didn't have the benefit of reading the second trade, but that actually brings an arc to Southpaw where we had seen her start as a villain. And now she's made good basically in the future. And you realize that she actually is part of She-Hulk's legacy as well, of having a positive impact on the future. So
Yeah, I think most of what I started reading in these issues, like it didn't make sense at first, but I was able to piece together and kind of get like, okay, she works at this law firm. Okay, it was recently destroyed, to get what she's about. So there wasn't really a whole lot that I felt like was lost on me, except for this. Like this was super lost
sure.
on me because I'd never seen this character before. And like I got enough to understand that this was somebody that was like personal to her, and we were seeing her from the future, so it was like a coming of age, grown up, and now I'm a professional moment, but it wasn't like personal to me because I hadn't seen this character before. So
Yeah.
I got it and I understood it, but it didn't have the same impact as like going back and reading the first volume from 2004 and then going, oh, okay, we've seen this character before, and here's how. Like she was sort of the
Right.
angsty teen who was running with the wrong crowd, and now she's, under this mentorship by She-Hulk, and that also makes the comedy, I think, land a little bit more as well, because
Yeah,
originally I'm just like, oh, okay, that's kind of mean, but it makes
right.
more sense.
Yeah, yeah, I think it was cool. I mean, I really like that where Dan Slott ultimately gets to in this story is that Jennifer Walters helps people and She-Hulk helps people. And so both of them are important. You can't have
Hmm.
one coexist without the other. And they really, I think, drive that home with the final story in this trade, which involves her going back to the town that she destroyed and helping to kind of rebuild, which was Bone, Idaho. And apparently, nobody died during that incident, but there were like 78 injuries or something like that and millions of dollars of property damage. And so, again, you're seeing her character and her desire to actually help people. And she actually comes clean at one point and transforms. It's the first time that she's able to transform and get around that psychological block and like in months or whatever
Hmm.
without using the gamma changer. And it's at this moment that she apologizes to everybody. She's like, I'm sorry. And they don't like sugarcoat it either. The comic is kind of like, well, there were mixed opinions. Some people accepted it, some people didn't, but now they know the truth of who destroyed their town and everything. And so I thought that was cool because that really did feel like now she's reintegrated She-Hulk back into herself and she understands how both parts of her are important.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, it's like we sort of start the one way of like, well, I'm just going to be She-Hulk all the time,
mhm.
and then she's sort of forced to use Jen Walters for a purpose, and then starts to go, okay, well, this is actually working out really well, and so now she goes the other direction, and now she's trying to find that like middle ground of being
Mhm.
able to accept, both halves of herself.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. Originally, I felt like, especially because the art style in that issue is such a drastic departure from the rest of the trade, I wasn't a fan. And it also seems a little bit darker, but I do think it's a nice button on her trial at the end to sort of show her back on the ground with normal people, not doing crazy, overblown stuff, and showing how she's still having a positive impact.
Hmm.
So there also was kind of a subplot about a character that started the Green Cross, which is apparently a relief organization for Hulk related disasters. And I guess that guy reveals that he was the person that dared Rick Jones to run out in front of the gamma bomb, which is what created the Hulk ultimately. Because the
Hmm.
Hulk, Bruce Banner, goes out to knock Rick Jones out of the way. And then Bruce Banner is hit by the gamma bomb and becomes the Hulk. And that's what happens. So that was an interesting kind of retcon for them to be like, hey, it's actually this guy that dared Rick Jones to go out there. And but I don't know, I felt like that felt a little forced, but at the same time, it was cool to have somebody that was like tied to Hulk mythos or whatever that was like, hey, I actually started this organization with my millions of dollars that I randomly have to help people from all these
Hmm.
disasters. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think the idea of the Green Cross kind of makes sense because we have Damage
Hmm.
Control, which is another organization, and they almost had I don't know if it was Disney Plus or if it was a movie or if it was before Disney Plus, but they were going to do something with Damage Control in the MCU, but I don't think that they did before we got to Ms. Marvel.
Yeah, I was gonna say Miss Marvel's the first place that I remember seeing him.
Yeah, there were rumors of it way before that, but that was the first time we actually saw them in the MCU. But it's interesting, the Green Cross. I wonder if we'll see that in the She-Hulk series that's coming up, because it seems like
Hmm.
something that, it's not necessarily important in a foreground way, but at the same time, like, the Hulk has caused a lot of damage,
Right.
and it would make sense that there would be an organization that would specifically go, like maybe they support the Hulk because they're like, well, we know that the work that is being done here is good, and he's able to
Mhm.
take care of all these threats, but we also know that unfortunately there's a lot of collateral damage, and so
Yeah.
we need to be there as first responders to sort of help for this because we believe in the Hulk, but we also want to make sure that everybody's safe and okay afterwards, because when two giant monster creatures get into a fight, I mean, how are you going to stop from destroying a building? It's like when
Right.
Superman and Zod are fighting, like, no offense, Bruce, but what was he
Yeah.
supposed to do? Like,
Yeah.
there's no way, like, that. It's just when you punch somebody and it makes a sonic boom and it destroys all the windows of a 30-story building, like, what are you supposed to do? I
I
mean, if you
don't
pull a
know.
punch, you're dead. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that is true. I think that that's something that they don't tend to address a lot in, at least in the Marvel comics that I've read, is like
Mhm.
the actual damage that they do to property and stuff like that. So that was kind of an interesting tidbit to me. I like that it was there, and again, it felt like it brought Jennifer's character a little more full circle, where she's reconciling with these people that she destroyed their town, and what I don't want is to see a whole lot of that going forward, though, because I think that that is more of Bruce Banner's thing, where
Yeah.
he's like, "I'm a monster," and he has that struggle where he has to deal with the destruction that his monster self causes to the other part of his life. And Jennifer is such a different, rich, in my opinion, probably a richer character, because I think she has more, there's more possibility for her to be taken through different stories than Bruce Banner, I think, just in the way she's set up, because she's got the law thing going, and she's got control over her transformations, and she's been on all these different teams, and I don't know, I've just always been a bigger fan of She-Hulk than the Hulk.
Mhm.
So,
All right. Well, that's pretty much all I've got for this one. Anything
yeah.
left, or should we move into our closing statements?
I think we're probably ready to go to final thoughts.
So this one was the first one that I read, but also, comparing it to volume one seemed
Mhm.
a lot more solid to me. And again, I don't know if that's because I went backwards, but I'm pretty sure you'll probably say the same thing when it's your turn to talk. That since you read it more in chronological order than I did, but I thought that there were a lot of things, even though that something like Southpaw that didn't really pay off for me, and like her
Mhm.
gamma changer was really confusing to me, but I just kind of assumed it was one of those, things that the character has, kind of like, Spider-Man's got web shooters, so it's essential to his character. So I didn't really, question it too much. But even though there were things I didn't necessarily pick up on, it was still I felt a lot more solid than volume one. And I haven't read volume two, but
Mhm.
volume three I thought was really good. It was well paced. The comedy felt like it landed, and it was in like good moments and in good taste. Even the part with Razorback,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know. I felt like the comedy was a lot more accurate and landed well, and we had a good
Mm.
story. The ending, I think, fell maybe a little flat, and that would be something that I wonder. I don't know if it's volume four or if there's another volume after this, like a
I
restart.
I think there are 5 trades total that Dan
Okay,
Slott wrote, I believe. That's how many I own anyway.
gotcha.
So,
So I can't really, rate it based on that because I haven't read
mhm.
those, but I would say volume three in and of itself, I enjoyed a lot. And that was sort of my first foray into She-Hulk solo series. So I'm actually going to give this one a 4 out of 5 because I just really enjoyed it.
Yeah. I think for all the reasons you said, the first volume was really, it felt like the ending undercut it a little bit, and that's why I knocked it down. In this one, I didn't care for the last couple issues as much as the first 4,
Hmm.
just like the previous one, but I still felt like they were kind of on theme and on character for Jennifer, and that it did continue to sell that point of her reintegrating both sides of herself and really just accepting that both halves of Jennifer Walters, the Jennifer side and the She-Hulk side,
Hmm.
can both help people for the better. So yeah, it was just a satisfying story arc. I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5 as well. I think that's a pretty comfortable place to put it. I don't think there's anything that would knock this over the top to put it in like one of our top tens or anything, but it's a really good, really satisfying story. I think
Hmm.
the run in general is worth reading. If you like She-Hulk, this is a really good place to start. I have read the whole 1980s era. I have that essential volume. So if anybody's interested in reading her beginnings, it is a little bit different because she does kind of do the rage thing for the first few issues before they figure out
What
that
to
it's
do with
more
her?
of like it lowers her inhibitions more, and I think she actually has 2 boyfriends at one point during those early issues, that I have
Hmm.
in the black and white essential. And so those were kind of character traits that they established early on, and this really feels like Dan Slott attempting to right the ship and write her a little more intelligently. So yeah,
All
four out
right.
of five bananas for me. And For further recommendations, yeah, I would probably recommend John Byrne's stuff from the later 80s. He was the one that really started to do the fourth wall breaking stuff a lot more. A lot of winks at the camera. There's also an issue where he runs into an old superhero that has been out of publication for a while and she's old. And she's like, well, Jennifer, that's how it works. You're popular, so you didn't age. But since I haven't been popular, I got old. And I'm like, wow, that's very meta of them to be saying about comic book characters, but that's kind of the tone of that one. So, and then Charles Soule's run is actually, it's only 12 issues long and it's really good too. So anybody that likes She-Hulk, go out there and find that stuff or read it on Marvel Unlimited.
All right. Sounds
So,
good. So now that we've had all of this She-Hulkness, what are we going to talk about next time, Pinky?
well, you know, I really like the color green. And so I think we need to stick with green characters moving
Okay.
forward. So with the release of the Cowabunga collection on every system known to man on August 30th, I think we're going to be reviewing a story of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that is to be determined because there are so many eras and publishers that I have not figured out where we're going to take that yet, but we'll definitely know by next time. So
It's a surprise.
that's right. Everybody, thank you so much for listening to these 2 episodes. Again, let us know what you thought on social media at Boneless Comics Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, at Boneless Comics 1 on Twitter.
All right. If you've enjoyed this 2-part episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review. And to stay up to date with our episodes, after shows, and get access to some of the behind the scenes content, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel at tinyurl.com/Boneless Comics Podcast. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
We like
Comics?
because they have no